And I think of that as climate action. And I call it sometimes little hope, not because it's not big hope, but just empowering the other people around you, making them feel like they have agency in their future, making the young people feel like their time on this planet is not doomed. I think we need to do that. Even if we don't feel it, I think we owe it to folks to give it to them, to young folks. Can you imagine just feeling like you are bearing down into the apocalypse, and how that changes your approach and your ability to connect and your ability to dream and imagine a future? So I really think of it as a practice of being kind to the folks around me, and then kind in these bigger circles, and in everything that I do, trying to think about how I might empower folks, even for a day, even for a week, make other people's lives better. And I think that that's so generative, and it starts to collect, and we kind of see momentum out of that.
It's funny because I went from Roy Scranton and I couldn't do anything for months because he stopped me in my tracks thinking that it was hopeless. And then I ran into Rebecca Solnit, and I really liked her phrasing of hope is like an axe. You have to get off the couch, and you have to go use it, and you have to work at it and fight at it every day. And you have a lot of that same enthusiasm.
Yeah, and I feel despair. I do. But I see young people and Indigenous folks and racialized folks and folks who have been in prison and standing up on the front line and doing it every day and risking everything. They are putting their bodies, their lives, their futures on the line. And I just don't think I can sit it out. I think sometimes it's such a philosopher's, ability to have apathy, because you're not suffering in the way that other folks are. And so if you can afford that apathy or to sit out. And I just think you've illustrated the point so well. When we approach with it's hopeless, we paralyze ourselves. And those stories paralyze people. They're not empowering. The social science says that it doesn't make people want to get up and stand up and join. And truly, the empowering in itself is a good end goal. Like, that leads to good lives. Whether we change the course of the ship or not, it's all important. It's all necessary, and it will all have been for something.
I sometimes get really down, especially the course where you and I met, where we spent some time talking about Canada specifically, in terms of how Canada has never met an IPPC target, has done so little with truth and reconciliation in terms of meeting the commitments that it promised to meet. And I could go on with a long list of commitments and fanfare that the government has promoted, but yet not delivered on. What has to change?
So I think one thing is just for folks listening, don't feel like you have to do it all. I really feel like lean into the things that already bring you joy and the communities that already bring you joy, and weave in your justice and your climate justice work into that. Make it generative on kind of every level. That's what I've done. I love stories. I love telling stories. I love gathering. I love dancing. And all of my climate work in the last 10 years has involved some of those elements. And so has felt not like a sacrifice, but actually the most joyful and engaging and anchoring thing that I do in my life. But I think some of it just has to start at a very small relational scale. I think we are no longer asking people to be very good. Like, it's not expected. The bar to be a good person is pretty low, particularly if you're, I would say, white and middle class. You're not expected to think about people beyond your immediate circle. You're not expected to be an engaged citizen, and you're not trained to think that you can make a difference, and so you don't feel like you have to. So I really focus on civic engagement and how do we train folks to realize that there's a problem and that they are key answers to that, and that climate justice is not just recycling or taking shorter showers. It's actually, showing up at protests, calling your representatives, voting, getting other folks to vote, learning about the Indigenous laws from the nation whose territory you live on, supporting Indigenous sovereignty. That is climate action. And politicians are always going to waffle or maybe do less as long as we don't hold their feet to the fire. And so people are doing amazing organizing already. That has to continue. Folks really holding down the front lines are doing the work. And I think the rest of us have to start building these relations where we're bringing more people in and asking them to step up and extend beyond their intimate personal circle as their view of who they're responsible to in this world.
I'm curious how your philosophy carries forward with the UBC Climate Hub.
I think it's deeply woven, and I will kind of tell you the 6 pillars that the Climate Hub works on. I guess just to give it a brief introduction, it's a student-led kind of research policy and action group at UBC, but it's unique because students lead it, but it actually has administrative and other key support from the university and full-time staff. And so it's this really genuine way to empower students and youth to shape university and government policy on climate and to empower their peers and people younger than them. And it's a unique model. And I think now it's going to be more necessary than ever to have these student-led research policy and action centers at universities, maybe even at high schools, because COVID is impacting the mental health of young people even more when we've already seen from the social science that climate was weighing so heavily on them. And we know the way that you deal with climate anxiety is that you act, you feel empowered to act. And I don't think there's anything better than just saying, all right, we're going to give you support. We're going to give you money. We're going to give you these things. You tell us what should we be doing, and how much that allows young people to step up and feel like they have a stake in their future and feel so much better mental health wise. And the hub has kind of 6 things. We are there to connect and empower stakeholders on a rapid and just transition, university and community stakeholders. And we really focus on justice, really, really making sure that our climate work is intersectional, that we're not just thinking about the polar bears, that of course so many other issues are climate issues, that systemic racism is a deeply, profoundly important climate issue because, it's these communities who bear the environmental injustices. You have to have disposable communities to have waste treatment plants and spewing of things and pollution. Like the political conscience has to be okay with putting that in place. And the way they do that is by not caring about certain bodies. And this point has been made amazingly well by Black writers this summer. So that's a key one, is justice. And then we really do focus on agency, of framing this as a way that everyone is important to this movement. Everyone has something to bring, kind of joyful community and hope. We like to think of ourselves as kind of this Gryffindor common room that, like, no one reads Harry Potter and knows about Voldemort and says they don't want to go to Hogwarts, right? Even though he's this like evil, existential, terrifying being, you want to go and join the camaraderie and lean in together in this.
It's so true.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it feels like that. I've rarely had the depth of friendship that I've made than what I've made out of this movement and out of the hub. And then we focus on systemic action rather than individual, because we know that most people think of environmental citizenship as recycling. And we're really trying to shift them. So instead of talking about the 3 R's or 4 R's, recycling, that list, we talk about the 3 V's, voicing your climate concerns to friends and family, volunteering for climate organizations, and voting. And really focus on how young folks can be these storytellers, that the way you build political will on climate change is just to talk about it and say that you need your parents and grandparents and other people to be voting with this in mind and to be making their financial decisions and their pension investments and these other things. You talk about it. And then our last one is storytelling. Just how, the humanities are sometimes undersold in their ability to help on climate change. But as my research shows, as I've spoken to you about before, like the fossil fuel industry has spent all of this time and money on ideas, on stories, on undermining narratives. And we have not spent the same amount of time and money and energy on creating new stories and pushing back.
So because you like storytelling so much, is that what got you into Planet Potluck?
Yeah, that was, I've tried telling climate stories in so many different ways. I have experimented with film, with short film. I wrote a trilogy of young adult climate fantasy novels, partly while I was at Harvard. I actually got one of my professors to give me credit for writing because I thought it was so intimately tied to the work I was doing. Like, why do the work if we're not making it accessible to people? I've tried this, like a stop motion film, and I give a lot of public talks because I think we're not telling the stories. Some folks on the front line are, but every single one of us has some kind of community that we could tell a story to. Every single one of us. It's your church, your family, any other group. And social science just shows over and over again, the most effective communicator to that group is going to be you. You are the voucher who can show that group how their values relate to climate action or climate justice. And the same thing about voting. The most important way to get out the vote that anyone can do is asking 5 or 10 of their friends. That's the most effective thing. Not a stranger calling them, not a stranger texting them, not watching a documentary, even though those things are all useful. It's all relational. And I think we forget our power, but I was awoken to mine. And now because I feel like I can do a lot of things, I feel like I have to.
So how were you awokened? What was the moment?
Well, I think it's not just one moment, but I did mention when I was in your class, I went to a talk when I was in law school. And up until that point, I'd been working on environmental justice, but avoiding climate change. I often compare climate change to being on a boat heading towards an iceberg. And it's terrifying. And I get why people want to just be like, the iceberg's not there, right? I'm going to head over here. I'm going to dance. I'm going to have some dinner. Like, I'm going to pretend.
I'm in denial.
Yeah, I'm going to pretend that the iceberg, because what can I do? I need to just enjoy my time on this ship. We're not going to turn it in time, right? And up until that point, I kind of was like, I know it's coming, but what can I do about it? And then I went to this talk, and it was Senator Sheldon Whitehouse in the US, and he framed climate change in hopeful terms for the first time I'd ever heard it. Ever. Just like, here are the things we've changed. Here's the progress we've made. Here are the policies that we could implement on a dime. Here's how political will is shifting. Here's these positives and potentials, and we need people in this fight. And I think, many other things have moved me. Many other, other folks on the front lines have been the ones really calling me into the fight of environmental justice. But on climate change, hearing that hope was really powerful. And so I started thinking about hope as a practice and its power to draw more people in and to feel like they have a stake in their future.
Can you talk about how this narrative or this story took you to authoring your books?
Well, one funny story about the books is actually some man told me that women couldn't write, that they were just inferior writers to men.
And well, that's a challenge.
Yeah, I feel like,
hello.
and so I had to write a book.
He obviously didn't read much.
Yeah. And my friends made sure to send him my book when it, because I hadn't known that I wanted to write one necessarily up until that moment. And then I was like, yeah, why not? I should write one. But I also, when I was reading, teens care about the world. Like, children and teens are so there. We really train ourselves to shut down and to start moving past things and say, there's nothing I can do about this. There's nothing I can do about these unhoused people. There's nothing I can do about this. But teens and children have not shut down or closed their eyes to those things. Mostly they have not been, it's a practice to shut yourself down to other people's humanity. We start, I think, being much more open to it. And so I was reading these books. I liked young adult fiction because I often found it the most powerful women, the most diverse casts often. But I was only reading